It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back on Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commanders from us on my quest to outbrew your favorite Magic channel. Had a week off on the channel. It was a crazy week in my life. Some things happened, but we're back. We're better than ever. And we are moving forward. We've got 2 more weeks left of our main Lord of the Rings content with Andrew and I. And then we're going to move on to Commander Masters and get back to doing some older commanders and just try to switch it up. I love the new sets. I love when new sets come out, and I want to brew all the decks I can for you guys. So today we're looking at the Elven Council precon from of course from Tales of Middle Earth with Galadriel, Elven-Queen. This is kind of what I would call my upgrade for the deck, trying to take it and put in inject as much fun into it as I can to make a fun elf deck. I tried my best to swing this a little bit more budget than some of my other brews, not in the sense that it doesn't have good cards in it, but just I think that elves, some of the elves are just fairly cheap cards, and I think we can still have a lot of fun with this deck without having to spend a ton of money on big fancy staples. So my hope is that you enjoy seeing an elf deck in Simic colors, because I think it's going to be really cool. Galadriel, Elven-Queen, 2 green and a blue for a 4/5 elf noble. It says, will the council, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if another elf entered the battlefield under your controller's turn, starting with you, each player votes for Dominion or Guidance. If Dominion gets more votes, if the rings tempt you, and then you get a counter on your ring bearer. If Guidance gets more votes, or the vote is tied, you draw a card. Okay, so Galadriel can tempt us and put a counter on our ring bearer, and if not, we draw a card. Kind of an interesting ability. I thought long and hard about how to pay off Galadriel the best way, and I just decided, well, the counter seems pretty cool. We could pay that off. But also, as elves just make a ton of mana. So I like the +1/+1 counter. We can use that. We can benefit from that. We can benefit from drawing the card. But in all reality, we're taking 2 things that are really good. Mono green elves make a ton of mana. It's something that's existed in the game, and elves have been the one tribe that I just haven't played too much with around. My first experience with elves was building Tyvar back in the last set. March the Machine, the Aftermath in black-green elves. So I thought it was kind of interesting to see what does blue give us in elves for this idea for this Simic Elves deck. And the truth is, it's just a lot of support pieces. A lot of our main elves are still green. They're still doing what elves do, tap for a bunch of mana, and we're going to try to play some effects to untap them. Or what elves decks tend to do is you make it to the mana, you play a bunch of creatures, draw cards, keep putting elves down, and then you have some sort of ability to kind of pump your board, give everybody trample, and swing in for damage. So that's the goal. We're trying to basically get a bunch of elves on board, get them big through either buffing or +1/+1 counters or trample, what have you, and run over our opponents. So starting off with the mana base, we're playing a few new things. I like the idea of Dol Amroth here just because it pairs up well with something like Marwyn or some of our legendary elves that have cool tap effects. So I like this. It seems like a great reprint, especially seems killer to throw in a deck like this. The Elven precon saw a reprint of Hinterland Harbor and Rejuvenating Springs, which is great. Those, especially the Springs, was getting a little bit expensive. So that's great to see a reprint there. We got the reprint of Reflecting Pool coming in from the main set. And then we're playing Castle Vantress and Rivendell. These are mainly in here because, of course, Rivendell is the land of the elves in Lord of the Rings. I like it. I think the scry is important, especially when we're drawing a ton of cards. And I just think it's going to end up being beneficial because we're going to find ways to draw cards, but we want to make sure we're drawing the right cards as much as we can. Although I think the one thing elf decks are just good at is just drawing a ton of cards anyway. So we'll move up into the enchantments, and I try my best to pick a good mix of effects that are going to give us value, and then effects that are going to help us end the game. So Asceticism seems like a great card. Gives all of our creatures hexproof. It can regenerate our creatures to get around a board wipe, which I like. It can protect all of our elves. Beastmaster Ascension is going to help us when we go to take that big swing, as long as whenever a creature attacks, we put a counter on it. Whenever we get 7 counters on it, everybody gets +5. All we need is a good trample payoff with this card, and we're going to end up hitting really hard. And we have a couple of them, so we'll talk about that as we go. Concurrent Crossroads, giving all of our creatures haste. There's a couple ways to do this. I just feel like this isn't a bad way to do this. Yes, this gives everyone else's creatures haste, but I don't think we care if we're making enough mana. And we pair this with something like Intruder Alarm, which says creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps. Whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. Intruder Alarm is basically going to allow us to tap all of our elves for mana, play an elf creature spell, untap all of our elves, and just net all that mana and keep going. This is going to work for a couple of our elves up top that we can just sink mana into to help us end the game. Garruk's Uprising, giving all of our creatures trample. We can draw cards if a big enough creature comes in. Guardian Project is probably one of the classic elf cards for drawing cards, because every time a non-token creature comes in, we get to draw a card as long as it doesn't share a name with any other creature. And all of our elves, of course, can have different names, because in Commander, right, you can only have one copy of any card with any name. So this is going to help us a ton in just helping us draw cards. Season of Growth seems interesting. When creature comes in, we scry one. This is great because we can order the triggers how we want to, and allow us to kind of get that extra look at the top card and maybe bin it if we don't want it. And then of course, if whenever we cast a spell that targets a creature, you can draw a card. That's not as important as the top one. I like the idea of just scrying one. Something that comes in, we can scry one before we draw. Simic Ascendancy, this is going to pay off some of the small amount of +1/+1 counter synergy we have. But my other thought process here is we may just make a ton of mana. And other than using Azuri, who we'll talk about when we get up to the creatures as far as elves to give everybody trample, we may want to just find a way to win the game. And what I like about Simic Ascendancy is it has a clause at the bottom. It's the beginning of your upkeep. If it has 20 more growth counters on it, you win the game. Well, how do we get growth counters on it? Whenever a +1/+1, one or more of them is put on a creature, you put that many on Simic Ascendancy. So what we could potentially do with all our mana is, on someone else's turn, we could put a ton of growth counters on Simic Ascendancy with all of the mana that we have, and risk ending the game when it comes back to our turn. This is just another way to potentially end the game, and we have so much extra mana to do it. Song of Electral seems kind of interesting. So the saga seems, the first two are kind of meh, but that last one is one that could potentially help us end the game. Scry 2, then draw 2, which isn't bad. Create a treasure and a bird, and a 3, put a flying counter on each creature you control without flying. Well, here's a way we could potentially end the game. I don't hate this. It plays into a little bit of the scry synergy that so many of the elves from the Lord of the Rings set care about. So it's kind of in there. This is like one of the cards I'm probably the least on. I feel like this could be taken out for some other things, but I thought, why not give it a try? It's a new card from the deck, and I feel like we should give some of those cards a try. I feel like when you're upgrading a precon, or when you're looking at precon, you want to give those cards a try to see if maybe they can surprise you, and if not, take them out for something else. And then Tribute to the World Tree. I expect this card to be played in every single elf deck that ever exists. If you're not buffing your elves at all, they come in and immediately get 2 +1/+1 counters. This could help us Simic Ascendancy. And if they're 3 or higher, you draw a card. So this can kind of act, hopefully, as another copy of like a Guardian Project or a Garruk Uprising, at just drawing us a ton of cards. I didn't play the Elemental Bond. I chose to play the Tribute to the World Tree over the Elemental Bond. But some green decks would play Elemental Bond as well, which is a very similar power 3 or greater draw card effect. All right, getting up into the artifacts, and I had a fun time coming up with these. Of course, you have the Signet and the Soaring. I mean, pretty classic commander cards. Again, elves probably don't need the Soaring help, but I thought, why not? I mean, it came in the precon. Why not use it here? The Great Henge just seems great, getting us counters on creatures and drawing cards and adding for mana. I love it. I think our creatures will more than outproduce mana over the Great Henge, but the Great Henge is going to help us put counters on creatures. Model of Unity seems kind of interesting. Whenever a player finishes voting, you and each player voted for a choice. Voted may scry for 2, and we can tap it, add from it. So Galadriel, right, is going to start a vote every combat, which means we're hopefully going to get that scry to every combat, and then of course just add a mana of any color. So this is just a 3 mana rock that taps for mana of every color. But the two things I was excited to add: Coat of Arms. I love Coat of Arms. People can say what they want about Coat of Arms. I think it's one of the best tribal enchantments, or typal enchantments, I apologize, in the game. Magic is of course going to typal instead of tribal, but +1/+1 for each of the creature on the battlefield that shares at least one creature type with it. So if I have 10 elves on the battlefield, each of them are getting +9/+9. All I need is a single trample enabler, and Coat of Arms will probably end a game outright unless someone can fog. And then Vanquisher's Banner. Here's another for us to draw cards whenever elves come in, or cast elf spells. I like it. Again, you could see the point. Get elves down, draw cards, get more elves down, and just farm this value. Keep going. All right, lots of spells. And I just realized that I kept some of the voting spells in, but I can't remember. Did I keep all of my voting elves in. I think I did. I did. Okay, I did keep all the voting elves, and I was scared for a second because tomorrow's video will be on the Scry Galadriel, and I put a little bit of voting in there. So I just wanted to make sure that I didn't get the lists confused. But yeah, okay, we'll talk about that in a second. All right, let's start with our instance. Beast Within, great removal. This got like one of my favorite new arts for Beast Within I've ever seen. I love this game in the precon. Galadriel Ambush, so the elves get their own arachnogenesis, making you X warrior creature tokens, where X is the number of attacking creatures attacking you, and then you prevent all combat damage to be dealt by non-elf creatures. This could be used either defensively when someone's attacking you, or this can also be used offensively by basically making a bunch of tokens and basically telling your opponents, well, you can chomp if you want to, but you're gonna get prevented. But I think this is a more defensive card. Growth Spiral again got a great reprint. Love the art on that. Love Growth Spiral. Another piece of ramp. Heroic Intervention saw a great reprint in this precon, giving all of our permanents. All of our permanents hexproof indestructible, not creatures permanents. So all of our artifacts, enchantments, that's great. I love it. Join Exploration. This came out Debonair United. I like it. 2 mana, just described to then draw. 3 mana, we can put a land down from our hand. So this is kind of a 3 mana gets us a growth spiral, but we also just scry 2 on top. I just think it's beneficial. Early game, if you have 3 mana, you don't care to look at a couple. Draw a card and put a hand down to see your next couple draws. Pongify and Rapid Hybrid for some removal. Both of these just destroy a creature, and our opponent gets a token for the for the privilege. Reality Shift is going to exile a creature and manifest top card of their library. Trap the Trespasser seems kind of interesting. So each player secretly votes for a creature we don't control. Then the votes are revealed. For each creature with 1 or more votes, put that many stun counters on it, then tap it. This isn't like my absolute favorite card in the world, but this Elf Precon focuses so much just on these voting cards, so I thought, why not just try to play some of those voting as a sub-theme, just to try to see if we can maximize on the value. And since Galadriel's voting every turn, if we have any ways to pay off the voting, like right with that 3 mana artifact, or why not try to do it? And then Winslow's Scythe seems kind of interesting. Card creature you control deals damage to its power equal to target creature you don't control. And then we make a 1/1 elf for each excess damage with this way. We're going to get some massive elves, and I like Winslow's Slice because we can basically just dump a bunch of extra elves onto the battlefield. This is going to be great with something like Coat of Arms or stuff like that, because then we can basically dump a bunch of extra elves in the battlefield, get even taller, and then now our opponents have to deal with more elves, bigger and bigger creatures. So as far as the sorceries go, I'm only playing one other true finisher in Overwhelming Stampede because Azuri up top in the creatures is probably one of the most popular elf finishers of all time. I really wanted to throw Finale Devastation. I wanted to throw Triumph of the Hordes in here because I think those are just those classic green, give, trample, go wide. But I wanted to avoid that for deck lists. I wanted to try to play with as much of the precon as I could. So I decided not to include those. But Overwhelming Stampede did come in the precon. So this one gives everything +X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And this isn't going to be hard when we have creatures like Marwyn that get bigger the more creatures you have. We have a bunch of things that buff our creatures. I think Overwhelming Stampede is going to be a lot of fun. Cultivate, Farseek, Nature's Lore, Rampant Growth, 3 visits for the ramp. We get Raise the Palisade, which is a really interesting kind of pseudo board wipe. Just a creature type, return all creatures that are not that type to their hand. We pick elves, we bounce all non-elf creatures to their hand. This could potentially, again, this could end a game. Everybody picks up their creatures, and hopefully it's just all our elves left, and then we can swing and end the game. Plea for Power seems kind of interesting, starting with you. Each player votes for time or knowledge. Time gets more votes, take an extra turn. If knowledge gets more vote, draw 3 cards. My only problem with Plea for Power, and specifically when we're talking about voting cards, is when you need more votes to do something, if your opponents see what the 2 abilities are, they're almost always going to vote for the one that is least good for you. So Plea for Power is just always going to end up being a draw 3. But again, I'm trying my best to still hold on to this voting theme. If you want to get rid of the voting theme, you take out Plea for Power, you put in a Brainstorm, you put in some Preordains or some Ponders, and you'd probably still get better draw than something like this. And if, as far as the extra turn goes, if you want to do that, there's plenty of other cards to do it. I know this card's going to see a lot of hate from some people watching this video. You can take the Expropriate if you don't want to play it. It's just in here because you vote. So if we're trying to play into this voting mechanic, this is one of the biggest voting cards that wasn't in the deck already, and it makes sense. A very oppressive card, very salty card, but I think it makes sense if there's any one thing I think elves can benefit from, it's extra turns, more turns to mass creatures, more turns to build your board up. And so, of course, and it pays off some of the voting stuff we have up top. So, again, if you don't like Expropriate, take it out. I think you can put in, you could put in just an overrun instead, and I still feel like you'd get good value out of it. Again, I was trying to get into this voting theme. All right, getting up into the creatures, we have no planeswalkers. It's not that you can't play any planeswalkers. I think Freyleys would work plenty well in a deck like this. I just chose not to. I wanted to try to play as many elves as I could, especially elves that give us good value. So we'll talk about the new elves, and then we'll talk about the pre-existing elves we have. So we have Arwen, Weaver of Hope. This one is from this deck. It says each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to Arwen Weaver of Hope's toughness. What this is basically going to do is Arwen is always going to always be more than a 2/1. We have so many ways to bump up our creatures. There's other elves that just give elves +1/+1. With that Vanquisher's Banner, with the Coat of Arms, there's plenty of ways to buff this thing up. And then every creature is going to come in bigger and bigger and bigger depending how big Arwen is. I like it. I think Arwen's going to be really beneficial to any elf deck. I think she will see play in a lot of old elf decks, not just in the new ones. And so I like seeing something like that. We see Celeborn the Wise. Whenever you attack with one or more elves, scry one. Okay, and then whenever you scry, it gets +1/+1 on a turn for each card looked at scrying this way. Okay, well, it's just always going to end up getting +1/+1. We really don't have any ways to manipulate the scry. But again, not a bad card. Again, I think there's some better elves, but again, I'm trying to use these, right? I'm trying to use these new elves in the deck. I think there's easier ways, to take it out for other things. We see Certain the Shipwright. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player secretly votes for a player, and then those votes are revealed. Each player draws a card for each vote they received. Each player who received no votes this way would put a permanent from their hand onto the battlefield. This is a really interesting effect because you kind of want to make sure everybody gets voted for. Otherwise, they don't get something to put from their hand onto the battlefield. But again, I think this is an example of another one of these voting effects, which seems weird. And this is why, to be honest, if I was going to take this list and make it my own, I'd cut out most of the voting stuff and just load it up with more elves, because I don't really quite understand the voting, especially if we're not completely paying it off. The one elf that I think pays it off the most is Arrestor the Council. It says whenever players finish voting, each opponent who voted for a choice you voted for creates a treasure token. You scry X, where X is the number of opponents you voted for a choice you didn't vote for, and draw a card. But it's not even really that good of a payoff. See, this is where I don't really quite understand what Wizards was doing with this precon. Like, they reprinted a ton of really great elves in this precon, and there's already some great elves to add to it. I think that the Galadriel Scry deck, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is just a better way to turn the Simic Elves train if you're looking to do something in blue, and we'll talk about why I think about that tomorrow. But Elrond of the White Council enters battlefield. Each player secretly votes for fellowship or aid. If for each fellowship vote, the voter chooses a creature they control. You gain control of each creature chosen this way, and they gain this creature can't attack its owner. Then for each aid vote, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So again, here's a way to spread some counters out. Elrond, Lord of Rivendell from the main set. Every enter another creature enters the battlefield your control, scry one. This is the second time this ability resolved. The ring tempts you. So kind of interesting. And then Elrond, Master of Healing. Whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on each up to target X target creatures, where X is the number of cards looked at this way. And then whenever creature you control the +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or ability opponent controls, you may draw a card. Okay, I like this Elrond a little bit better. Putting the counters, scrying, you can see this fits what we're trying to do. Elvish Mariner, whenever it attacks, we scry one. And whenever we scry at all, tap up to X target non-land permanents, where X is the number of cards you looked at way while scrying this way. I love this card. See, this completely pays off the scrying stuff we're trying to do. And this is why I brewed this deck first, and then I was like, well, this scrying, there's actually a lot of these effects, and that's what actually forced me to go over and brew the Galadriel we're going to talk about tomorrow. So again, this is more or less me trying to just raise up the precon. Tomorrow's video is going to be me taking Galadriel, the scry Galadriel from the set, and actually building a scrying focused elves deck. So if you're interested, that'll be coming up tomorrow. But let's talk about all the old ones. Allosaurus Shepherd, probably the single most expensive card in the deck, I would guess, but it's such a great finisher. This spell can't be countered. Green spells you control can't be countered. And for 6 mana, each elf becomes base and tower and has 5 happens go to dinosaur or its other types. So it's just going to raise the base value of all our elves up, so their buffs become even better. And then if we can give them trample another way, it gets even better. I like this. But I think once we get to Azuri, he's just a little better of a finisher. Beast Whisperer, whenever we cast creature spell, draw a card. That's what elves are so good at, drawing cards and getting more creatures down. Canopy Tactician, +1/+1 for all our other elves, and can tap for 3 mana. Circle of Dreams Druid, green mana for each creature we control. So as you can see, with Intruder Alarm, as we start to untap, these kind of creatures, they're going to start making a ton of mana for us. Elvish Archfiend, each other elf gets +1/+1, and then add a green for each elf you control. Here we go. More elves, more mana. Elvish Champion, all elves you control have +1/+1 in forest walks. They're unblockable as long as the defending player controls a forest. This is going to help us sometimes. It's not going to hit everyone, but I think it's going to hit enough people considering how popular green is in Commander. Now, that's not a basic forest. As long as you have a land type that's a forest, they have forest walk. The other thing that I find kind of interesting with this is if someone's playing something like Dryad of the Elysian Grove or something that gives all lands every land type, this is also going to come in benefit. Elvish Mystic, just a flat add a green for a green. Elvish Warmaster, whenever one or more elves enter the battlefield under your control, we make a 1/1 and just have a once per turn. And then for 7 mana, elves get +2/+2 in Death Touch. So not the best buff in the world, but I think still kind of interesting. Azuri, okay, here's our main one. 3 mana, 1 green mana can regenerate another target elf. This ability is great because if we can untap another creature or leave a creature up, like Elvish Archfiend that can tap a green for each elf we control. We tap for that much mana, regenerate every elf we control. Besides Azuri, of course, it can't regenerate itself. And then we save most of our board. And then for 5 mana, every elf we control gets +3/+3 and trample in a turn. Well, there's one of our finishers. We buff them all up a little bit, give them all trample. They're already probably going to be big to begin with. And we swing in. Finhorn Elves, again, 1 green mana to tap for a green mana. Haldir, Lorien Lieutenant, here's one of the new ones when it enters battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And then for 6 mana, every other elf we control gets Vigilance and +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Haldir. So, hey, Vigilance couldn't be that bad either, especially because we could attack and then tap for mana. Imperial is perfect, +1/+1 for everybody else, and tap it to make a token. This is not a bad thing with something like Intruder Alarm because we could tap it, make the token, and that token would untap everything else. This could be kind of an interesting combo with that. I like Jiraga Tree Speaker. This is an interesting card. So comes down for 1. We pay 2 to make it level 1, and then it can tap for 2 mana. And if we have the extra mana, we can level up to level 5, and all of our elves can tap to add 2 green mana. So this is kind of interesting because then all of those tokens that come down can add 2 green mana, which looks pretty cool. Jiraga Warcaller seems like an interesting card. When it comes in, we can pay an extra 1 into green as many times as we want to. It enters with that many counters on it, and then all of our elves get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on the Warcaller. So the more mana we have, the bigger this thing is, and this can just come down and buff all of our elves up. And then we can swing in for some good damage. Leaf Crown Visionary, all of our other elves get +1/+1. And whenever you cast an elf spell, we can pay green if we do a draw card again. Here's another great way to draw some cards. Legolas Greenleaf can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less. Whenever another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, we put a counter on it, and then whenever it deals damage to a player, we draw a card again. Get some counters on it, draw some cards. I like it. Llanowar Elves, another one of our classic elves. 1 green mana to tap for a green. Marwyn, probably one of the most well-known elves of all time. Whenever another elf comes in, we put a counter on it, tap a green mana for every for Marwyn's power. So the bigger she gets, the more mana she taps for. Priest of Titania, green for each elf on the battlefield. Again, here's another one of these great abilities that's just going to be so helpful. Realm Walker, we pick a creature type. Of course, in this deck, it's going to be elves. We can look at the top card and we can cast elves from the top of our library. Again, I like it. It's another elf, so it affects all of our other elf effects. That seems pretty good. And then Tyler's Provisioner can get us a treasure or a food when we play a land. Again, not a bad elf on its own. It's just going to give us some extra mana. And of course, we like the treasures because they are basically the treasures are going to allow us to tap, right? Of course, use that for green or blue mana. So, yeah, a pretty interesting deck as far as that goes. I think, again, your goal here is to get elves down, ramp up for mana, and then find yourself trying to get into some of your finishers to get some good mana. We're playing something like Natural Order, which I realized I forgot to mention, to sacrifice either one of our little green elves, like a Llanowar Elves, or a token to go get something like Marwyn or Azuri that can help us end the game, and you can do that for 4 mana. But let me know in the comments. What do you think of Galadriel? Again, this is an interesting precon idea. I just think that Wizards went a little bit too much into the voting for my liking. I don't know that I really see how it works, but I think it's interesting. And I am interested to see if any of the voting elves get to see a ton of play. But if you're interested in seeing, like I said, tomorrow, we're going to have Galadriel of Lochthwain up on the channel. That's the Scry Galadriel. If you're interested in that, check it out tomorrow, and we'll talk to it. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.